Good evening, everyone. Hope you all are doing good. I'm Amrupali, General Manager of our Hyderabad chapter, and I would like all of you welcome to the fourth session of SVP's Learning Series. A learning series is actually an attempt to help all of us understand the sector and its nuances better. Today's session will delve into various funding trends globally and in India. Collaboratives, unrestricted funds, cash transfers, giving circles, and more. You'll get an insight on what the nonprofits have to say about the emerging trends and how they're preparing themselves for it. Today, our speakers for the evening are Deval Sanghavi. Deval leads Dasra strategic philanthropy efforts and provides foreign and domestic philanthropists with informed investment strategies for the social sector with human lives, of course, as a center of all of its thinking. Welcome, Deval. Ved Arya, a social development entrepreneur and author who has founded and developed multiple social development organizations, which are successfully working to transform rural livelihood opportunities and poverty elevation among the poorest of the poor in India's villages. Ved is also the founder and former CEO of SRIJAN, Self-Reliant Initiative through Joint Action, which features among the top non-profit organizations in India. Welcome, Ved. We also have Mrinalini Ravi, the co-lead for the Sundaram Fastener Center for Social Action and Research at the Banyan Academy. She holds bachelor's in psychology and master's degree in mental health services research. She has held several portfolios in the past decades, but holds her 5-year stint managing a shelter for homeless men with mental health issues closest to her heart. Her dream is to establish a recovery college and enable more students like her to benefit from peer-led education and research. Welcome, Mrinalini. And our very own Govind Iyer. Govind Iyer, based in Mumbai, advises family businesses and corporations on CEO succession and board governance. He also advises private equity clients in building leadership teams in their portfolio companies to maximize values of their investments. Govind has served on the Wharton Executive Education Advisory Board and is an active University of Pennsylvania alumnus. He's also a founding board member of Social Venture Partners in India, is a board member at Give India, and #Living My Promise signatory. Thank you all for joining us today. A warm welcome to you all. I would like it to Govind to take it forward to the evening ahead. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Amrapali. Thanks for that introduction to all the team. So what we'll do is that Deval and I will have a few questions that I'll ask Deval and just get this show on the road, as I call it, for conversation. But I would encourage all of you 60 people on the call to feel free to post your questions on the Zoom, and we'll find a way to get the answers to you through Amrapali and Parul. We'll find a way to get the answers to you. So maybe I'll kick off, Deval, by saying that just a little bit of history. Deval and I met many years ago, yonkers ago, and he's been an inspiration for me personally, both he and his wife in the way they came back to India and started Dasra, one of the earliest organizations, I think, that's made one of the biggest impacts in the country. And I've learned a lot by attending the Dasra Philanthropic Week. It used to be a week, right, at one point, Deval? And I think as time has gone by, it's evolved into very different avatars. So I've had an opportunity to see Dasra evolve, probably not at close quarters, but from a distance. And I would love to start by asking you, Deval, that how has Dasra really evolved in the last few years? I wouldn't use the word pandemic, but really the last 3 years or so. And how have you seen philanthropy, the trends in philanthropy change, which has enabled you to do much more as Dasra? So Dasra's journey and connected with the trends in philanthropy.
No, thank you, Govind. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate having these conversations. I think, as we all know, the need is now more than ever. And I think having people on the ground like Ved and Mrinalini speak later today is going to be great, just to hear about what are the needs of the country right now. And many times these are not covered by the newspapers. And so I really appreciate this opportunity. I think in the last couple of years, there have been a few sort of shifts, I would say, in the sector overall, both in India as well as globally. And a lot of those shifts, I would say, definitely have been accelerated because of COVID. And so I think, number one, across the board, people have realized that power, decision-making, and funding have been really set with just a few people making those decisions. And so a lot of the structural issues that we have both within the country as well as globally have never really been solved because there hasn't been as much inclusion in terms of other voices, hearing from minority groups, hearing from vulnerable communities, enabling them to not just take leadership positions, but also make decisions that many times they've not even been part of taking. And so I think there's been a real shift, Govind, so to speak, in terms of really a need to go back to the communities we're serving, listening to them, but more importantly, having them lead efforts versus us as givers and as supporters sort of think we have the right answer. And so about 3 years ago, we started seeing shifts, I would say, where people were starting to meet with the communities more, trying to understand what their needs are. Even the government of India, we work at Dasra quite closely with them on urban sanitation, as well as the 250 million adolescents across the country. And even government was trying to sort of understand more on what the community needs were directly from the community. I think what happened in the last 18 to 20 months since COVID really hit has been yet another sort of introspection and realization that a lot of the times, the donors get it wrong, and we're not including the right voices in the room. And so whether it was with the migrants here in India and a realization that the rights that you and I and many of us on this call have in terms of workers' rights, it really just pertains to 8% of our country, and 92% of our labor force do not have those rights. And so that was number one in terms of just seeing that, the haves and have-nots, the divide doesn't just exist in terms of services that were being offered, but also constitutional rights that we have. And then I guess the second really has been just how do you then start providing greater funding support and flexibility to the NGOs that we support, enabling them to take the calls as and when required. I mean, I think COVID has really taught us that decentralized solutions are required, number one. Unrestricted capital is also required because we have no idea when the second wave, third wave, or fourth wave is going to be coming. And so a year ago, you saw Vidya from Edelgive, Azim Rashad from Wipro, and the Ford Foundation come together and sign a pledge, which really focused on greater unrestricted funding, longer term funding for organizations, and really putting the power of decision-making back to the NGO leaders versus the donors sort of prescribing this is what needs to be done year on year, which clearly is not the right approach if you want our organizations to be agile and our community voices to be heard.
So that's great. And I think you touched on two themes that I've written down here. One was the unrestricted capital, the need for unrestricted funding to be able to serve the community and serve the impact. And that's something that I think we have seen a lot in the last year or two in India, that a lot of people have given money by saying, let's make sure it goes to the right causes, but not necessarily define it that it has to go to A cause or B cause only. Wanted to get a sense from you, from what Dasra has done, but also what you have witnessed, Deval, is, has there been a shift in mindset in the engagement with NGOs versus just giving to NGOs? We've been just keen to understand your perspective on that.
And so I think there's definitely been a far greater collaborative view that NGOs have had, especially with this last wave that had hit us, because many of our colleagues had 30 to 50% of our staff infected with COVID or directly affected with COVID. And so we've seen many collaboratives sort of take form, whether it's the RC collaborative, which Ved will speak about later today, another group called Catalyst 2030, which is a global organization, which really came together again with NGOs themselves coming together, setting a mandate, and then donors joining. And so we're seeing sort of these trends now pick up. Even when we think about opening of schools, there's a group of educational NGOs that have come together to say, okay, well, what does it mean to open schools up safely? And how do we help the government to do that? And so I think there's a far greater sort of desire for groups to come together and learn from each other. I think there's also a far greater view that the sector should have, in certain aspects, a singular voice. And then no way does that mean every NGO has to have one intervention. But again, when it comes to opening schools or livelihoods or even healthcare, as we are facing this pandemic and will continue to, unfortunately, for the next 3 to 5 years in the communities that we serve, it's really understanding if you're going to fund healthcare, how does that sort of look like now? What does that look like now? And so do we need to now give an additional 15 or 20% of funding to do what used to be done with lesser expenses? Do we need to give larger timeframes in place? Our view now is that whatever used to take 1 to 2 years will probably take 5 years going forward. And so again, reiterating the need for flexible funding, the need to trusting the organizations on the ground, and the realization that probably in the next 3 years, every year will take a 3-month halt with whatever the NGO is doing, given the communities they serve are under stress, and they will need to pivot, whether it's to give food, whether it's to give to time off, or whether it's even to look at mental well-being. But there are going to be sort of changes that we're going to see in the next few years, and the sort of long-term 3 to 5 year strategies, while they're important, I think now is actually not the time to have those or invest in them, but more importantly, really look at the organization and enable them to be the best they can be in supporting the community's needs.
Yeah, no, you raise a great point. I mean, I think one classic example of somebody who's put, I guess, money where their mouth is what McKinsey Scott has done, right? Which has been completely unrestricted, over $3 billion given out to many NGOs to say, build your capacity, build the capability. And I think we need many more examples of that to be able to drive long-term impact. Another direction that I'd like to seek your thoughts on is at SVP, as you know, we have a large group of partners who get engaged with NGOs in a deep fashion way. Do you feel that there's a greater willingness now or a trend in the willingness of not-for-profit organizations to seek guidance and help and collaborate within each other also? 5-8 years ago, there was a lot less collaboration that one would want. But have you seen a collaborative nature coming through a little more now, thanks to the fact that everybody's in the same boat and we're all swimming against the tide in some ways with the pandemic?
100%. And I also think that many organizations, again, because they are good at one thing, let's say it's education or health or livelihoods, they can only focus in that area, but they realize, again, that the community needs all of these interventions. And so we're seeing NGOs collaborate far more on that level. And so, for example, with mental health, we are seeing mental health organizations training and supporting other NGOs focusing on other issues, but mental health is a big issue that everyone is dealing with right now. In the same manner, because it's such a stressful period, we are seeing just a greater need for NGOs to have sounding boards, to have people help them think through sort of, the crises that they're facing. I mean, now when we sort of last year, I guess, when COVID hit and the financial crisis that hit, after that to the NGO sector, one of our board members, Tarun Jotwani, used to run Lehman Brothers before the 2008 crash here in India, stated that, look, everyone will say this is a 1-month window, but you'll need to plan for a 3 to 5 year window. You'll need to look at your balance sheet. You'll need to understand your cash flows, and you'll need to make some quick and sometimes hard decisions upfront, given that this will last much longer. And so what we did as an organization was bring that knowledge to about 250 NGOs across different spaces in the country, helping them identify their cash flows, understand their balance sheets, something that they weren't used to, provide them language to go back to their donors to ask for unrestricted funding or longer term timelines. And so in a similar manner, I think given the second wave that's happened and the many more waves that are unfortunately going to come, I think NGOs really need some support in thinking about impact pivots, because their programs on the ground will not be the same for the foreseeable future. And that's another area I think where SVP partners can get engaged and involved, and really even giving guidance on if they've opened up their offices on the for-profit side, how did they do so? How do they ensure vaccines were made? What liability have they undertaken? I think there's a lot of understanding, I think, and experience in the corporate sector on how they've dealt with things that can benefit, most of the NGOs today.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to take a question from the floor. It's from Jagdish. Has this pandemic been a transformative moment for philanthropy, I guess, in India or worldwide within India? And has the pandemic created more social divide? 2 different questions, whichever way you want to take them.
Social divide far greater than ever before. Only a few of us are privileged enough to have Zoom and to work in the comforts of our own home. And so I think that's unfortunately the case. I mean, I think 45 to 50% of kids in this country had no access to online learning tools and continue not to have that access. So just think about not just missing 18 months of school, but possibly in the next 18 months being in and out of school as COVID cases go up. And so you're looking at a large percentage of our population who will not be educated for 3 years. These are groups that were already on the verge of dropping out. They were from vulnerable communities. Their families have been pushed back into poverty. And so I think that divide has increased significantly. In terms of being a transformative moment for philanthropy, I think globally, one of the good things that have happened for India, at least, is the realization, thanks to foreign media, that we still have a lot of issues in our country and we still need a lot of philanthropic capital. 2 years ago, many of the larger donor agencies were thinking of pulling out of India, thinking we're close to becoming a middle-income country. Most of the press that we've had in the country thus far has been on the billionaires that we have and the success that we've had. But really in the last 2 years, I think there's been a realization that international aid not only needs to continue, but needs to increase. And so I think that's been great for the short term. The goal is hopefully that continues for the medium to long term.
Thank you. Another question that came up was, just want to take it in the order I got it. Yeah, from Sanjeev as to how can we get more people who are keen to get involved in contributing to the social sector to get involved, moving out of their comfort of their home and really getting straight into the ground.
I think sessions like these are great. It allows people, again, from the comfort of their own homes to hear what's happening on the ground, to gain some certain exposure and to be motivated to do more. As you will hear from the speakers later today, there's still a phenomenal need that our communities have, and that just increased because of COVID. And so I think that's number one. I think number two is to share the positive experiences that each one of you have had in being in this space. Unfortunately, the negative experiences, and this is life in general, tend to sort of be far more viral in nature and remembered than the positive experiences. And so I think we all owe it to the sector to speak about, our experiences and the needs of the sector far more, and how trustworthy these NGOs really are. I think there's, for whatever reason, a huge trust deficit, and it's up to us, especially as givers or those from the outside, to convince others on the lives that have been risked by these NGOs and that continue to be risked, and how we need to support them in their efforts, not the other way around.
No, I think that the trust deficit piece is the big one, Deval. That needs to change over time. And, as I say, I think at this point of time, the philanthropic sector is growing well, but we're still not an industry that's got the same degree of, I would say, respect or necessarily the attention to make it all one unit. So that's an opportunity. There was a question from Stigda, are Indian donors ready for unrestricted funding? I think you referred to Rishad and Vidya and the others getting together and talk about unrestricted funding. At SVP, for example, the 5.5 crores we raise every year through our partners is all unrestricted. We apply to NGO grants, but based on our choices. It's not defined. Are funders ready in India, you think? And what can we do, Deval, as an organization to drive more unrestricted funding?
Again, I think it's shocking because 22 years ago when we started Dasra and we've supported groups like Bill Grow, Magic Bus, Akshay Patra and others, our philosophy never changed. It was always unrestricted. It was always operating expenses. It was always focusing on the areas that organizations found difficult to raise funding for. The amendment in the FSRA laws have made it even more difficult now for organizations to get unrestricted funding from global funders, since that cap now has been put to 20% from any foreign funding coming in. And so I think local donors have a real opportunity and obligation to step up and provide more of their funding towards these expenses. So then the foreign donors who by law are not able to provide a higher degree of unrestricted funding or general operating expenses, they can then fund some of the program expenses. The same holds true with CSR. While CSR has been a great boon to our country, unfortunately, many of the corporates don't understand the realization of funding general operating expenses. And so I think individual donors, especially who are not bound by laws that are either governing foreign remittance into the country for NGOs, or are not focusing on the CSR Companies Act, I think there's a real need, if not I'd say necessity, for individual donors to fund 100% of their giving towards these general operating costs, because it's so hard to, number one, get these funds, and it's actually the most sustainable funding you can give. You mentioned McKinsey Scott and others. I mean, when we gave money, for example, to groups like Magic Bus, we'd give 10 lakhs a year for 3 years. By year 3, their budgets were 1.5 crores, and they were able to absorb their operating costs through their project budgets. But it takes sort of that time frame, for you to focus on. So I think there's a real need, again, for people like us who are sort of, in the sector, but outside the sector, to convince others on why this sort of general operating expenses are so critical and needed, especially from Indian donors.
If I take a stab at this, I'm trying to get to a solution orientation over here. If we as a group of people on this call and outside are able to establish the credibility, trust, and transparency of our NGOs, would that lead to more unrestricted funding coming in? I mean, what's the stumbling block for people to say, let me give you the money, decide you do what you want with it. We know it's going to make an impact. What's been your experience, Deval, there in terms of unlocking that restricted to unrestricted?
Yeah, I think number one is just to realize that and acknowledge the NGO sector has far greater compliances and regulations. Correct. Than any other sector in India. Every group has audited, every group has to file with the Home Ministry, with the Registrar of Companies if you're a Section 8 company, with the Income Tax Department, sometimes with the Charity Commissioner. So we have 4 or 5 regulatory bodies that we're already reporting to. So it is highly regulated and highly audited. So that's, I think, number one. I think number two, in the business world, we never provide equity investments in a restrictive manner. We never go to an entrepreneur, decide to fund them and say, you can only use this much for internet usage or this much for office expenses. And so I think it's just helping people realize the same trust you put into for-profit entrepreneurs whose honestly mission is not social oriented. Why can't you do the same for NGOs whose mission is socially oriented and have a higher degree of regulations that the government and their institutional donors put on top of that?
Okay. Great. No, I think that's a good segue into a different area, which is what's happened to the mindset of people in the pandemic in terms of giving, but also in terms of making a contribution. And what I mean by that is, has it changed with the young and the old? Have you seen any directional change as you've built Dasra, as you've worked with NGOs? Has there been any change in the mindset of people as they're looking at India and giving back to making India a stronger India?
And so I think giving has increased significantly, no questions asked, right? And I mean, you sit on the board of Give India. How much has Give India raised, Govind?
Well, in the last 18 months, to about 1,200 crores. Exactly.
And so 1,200 crores, this is more than I'm assuming Give India has ever raised in their 20 years of existence.
Many-fold that.
and so I think that's, unfortunately, it took a global pandemic for us to realize that there is a need. I think 2 or 3 things we need to understand. Number one is that the organizations that we're supporting, and more importantly, the communities that they support, they've had their version of COVID for generations. They've had to go on lockdowns. They've had, various diseases. They've had water shortages. They've had various issues. And we just in the last, 18 to 20 months have faced this. And so now we're realizing it. But the communities we serve have always had these issues. So a lot of these sort of, I guess, principles of giving should not stop and cannot stop just because we are vaccinated now and we think things are back to normal. So I think that's really important. I think giving is definitely increased. The question, though, is will it continue at the same pace? And I think that realization, hopefully, people understand that all of us on this call have far greater capital than we ever have had and probably even dreamt of having when we were raised or going to college or graduating. And so there's a real need to give back to our community, especially when our income tax rates are at a level which will never solve the poverty numbers that we're seeing today in our country. And so I think it's just the sustained responsibility is important. And SVP, again, is a perfect example of individuals who are paying taxes, but also realize there's a need to give back in other ways and forms. And so I think these kind of movements are really important and critical to scale.
So I'm going to take the last question from Louise. And Louise, Miranda, I'm sorry, I don't fully understand the question. I think there's probably a mild typo. But Louise, you want to just ask a question online?
Sure, my typing is bad. So I'm logging on through Fiona's thing. So is the talk on trust deficit a red herring? Because in the corporate world also, there have been a lot of misallocation of funds and people still invest. People don't check with religious funding where that money goes. So this trust deficit, to be honest, I'm tired of hearing this as an excuse.
No, Louis, and I completely agree with you. And I think this is exactly what we need to speak more about. When you look at campaigns that are sort of held even online, no one asks any questions, everyone gives. When you look at religious giving, when you do a lot more of investing, even, we don't ask the same questions. And so I think it's really a realization. If you're gonna trust an organization enough to fund them, you need to trust them enough to make the decisions on how those funds are used. And that sort of mindset has to shift. I mean, it's frustrating. For 22 years now, we still haven't seen that change amongst all donors.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So let me close with that last topic. And Amrapali, the next topic is to bring the two NGOs in. I guess that's the discussion.
Yes, I think.
Yes.
So I'll hand it back to Deval to take that through.
And so we have two fantastic speakers today who've been working tirelessly for the sector and for communities for well before COVID, but have seen disruptions again in their work. And so Ved and Mrinalini are here. Mrinalini, I'm going to start with you first because as we discussed earlier today, mental health and well-being is something that finally is being at least discussed in open forums and something that was never really looked at. And the Banyan has significant experience in this topic. If you can give us a sense on sort of what has happened in the last 2 to 3 years for the Banyan, how has mental health sort of become an issue, and what are some of the needs, I guess, that the communities are facing right now, that would be just fantastic.
Thank you, Deval, and thanks for the brief that we had earlier also, and all the support that you've been extending, all of you who are in this call, because, working in an area like mental health over the past 30 years in India, so I'm just feeling like it's piling on that, earlier nobody wanted to invest in mental health because you wouldn't see any tangible outputs. And that was a very myopic way of looking at things, because I think when the pandemic hit and when, only when you're faced with a certain, a tribulation of this sort, you realize that it's everywhere. It's, it sort of penetrates and percolates into every part of your life. So, so the fact that so many of you have stepped up to think about mental health, talk, and ultimately contribute is a fantastic thing. So I'm very, very happy to be here. With regard to the losses, the mental health losses that people have suffered over the years. So the Banyan's focus is largely on homeless people with mental health issues and people from ultra vulnerable communities. And a very, very significant part of our constitution. So it is women from ultra vulnerable communities the leadership is, almost entirely women, I must say. So in an organization like this, we started, the pandemic was very visceral for some of us because, we work with these vulnerable communities, and we saw the losses sort of step up one by one, from starting from, not being able to go out, and then losing your job, and, your child not being able to go to school, and, to even many of our children go to school just to access the midday meal, which stopped. So the mental health losses and the insecurity that arose as a result of the pandemic, leading to multi-level and largely permanent losses was extremely visceral for all of us. And we work with irregular communities, tribal communities in Chennai and Chengalpet and in the Nilgiris, and women who are subjected to domestic violence. Many of our staff are themselves, and they had to work long hours just to be there for us, and they stepped up, for which we're forever grateful. grateful. So the ultra vulnerable communities and their losses during this time has had a very, very negative cascading effect, which we are sort of trying to put out by coming together and to stop and arrest it in its tracks. So so in addition to the communities that we work in, and we increased our outreach during the pandemic, we were looking at panic calls of victims of domestic violence and children at the risk of abuse, sex workers. There was really no solution. We didn't have a contingency plan. So so we are actually, all of us are coming together and holding on to this right now. But like Deval, you said, what about the third wave and the fourth wave? And this is going to be a reality for a couple of years. So I would say that the investment that is required on making mental health a priority across all sectors and across all cadres of staff is incredibly critical at this point. And to bridge the knowledge gap on mental health across communities. We were talking about education here, so education on mental health and in areas which are unreached, and where there are no phones, like you were talking about. So these conversations need to happen, and these backup plans and these contingencies need to be formed by all of us coming together, and a lot of intersectoral collaboration. Otherwise it will it's not to sound too negative, but it will have rather frightening consequences 5 to 10 years or 15 years from now.
No, thank you so much. Thank you. And like you said, I mean, I think there's been a significant uptick in terms of domestic violence, mental health issues are at an all-time high, and many children who haven't been to school they also have their own well-being issues as they integrate back into the program. And this is not even talking about those who've lost lives. Ved, I'd love to come to you now. I'd love to get a sense. I mean, I know the Azim Premji University put out a report a few months ago saying that in 2020, before sort of COVID hit, it was estimated that 50 million people would move out of poverty, but instead 220 million people moved back into poverty. And that was just 2020. That's not even the second wave that we've seen right now. Could you give us a sense on sort of the impact that COVID has had on livelihoods in the communities that you're in and that you serve?
Thank you, Deval. And I am very glad to be here at this SVP platform. We have talked, Luis Miranda and I have exchanged a few notes before. So there are some friends out there. And I am from the IIT Kanpur 79 batch. I am a 81 batch. So many people, I think, from my batches or my senior batches would already be members of the SVP. So basically the point I'm making is I can connect with you, although I left TCS in 82 and thinking that Tatas would find many Ved Aryas, and they did. And I told Ramadurai, you did better because I left TCS. So I'm very, very happy to be here. That is and Deval, thank you for inviting me. I don't hold any aces up my sleeve as far as philanthropy is concerned, because I am a professional beggar. I have just gone always to write a proposal to get money for the people I happen to be working with. I want to add a couple of data points to what Deval you quoted, the extent to which the poor people have suffered. In fact, the data that Rishad Premji put out earlier in the week was before the pandemic, and you would have read that article, 50%. What is the median income for Indian households? Any guesses? Is 15,000 rupees per month. That means half of our households earn less than 15,000 rupees, which translates to 125 rupees per person per day, and which is even less than the poverty line defined by, you may not like the World Bank, but $1.9 per day is more than 125. Can you imagine this figure? It's shocking. In 21st century, half of our households are living below poverty line. And further shocking was that 25% bottom quartile are earning only 8,500 rupees per month. which is 70 rupees per person per day. If you go out and have kulcha, or you just want to have roti and dal in a restaurant on the roadside today on a highway, it will cost you that much. So I think the basic needs are also not met. I'm not going to the what Arvind Subramaniam said or whatever. The basic minimum needs are also not met. Imagine then comes this COVID-19, and then comes the second wave. What would have happened? Even the Pew Research, which is quoted in the New York Times, 35 or 32 million middle class Indians moved into poverty. So I think all of us, and I count me in your category, it doesn't matter, I have come this side, but we are all middle class people, and I am speaking from an air conditioned room, even though I may be working with an NGO. So I am among the privileged few, even among the NGOs. So I think what has happened is this: we were trying to see livelihoods in the rural areas more as an integrated farming system. But post COVID, we have had to integrate welfare into our programmatic profile, which is what Mrinalini was talking about. Ultra poor, the number of ultra poor has increased. One example I'll give you is this: Anganwadi is closed, as Mrinalini was saying, which means what? The pregnant and lactating mothers were not getting their nutrition, and the babies who were less than 3 years old. That means the first 1,000 days, the nutrition is the most important for the brain development. So what is called THR, take home ration, became the most important thing for the NGOs who were working in livelihood. Forget about livelihoods, people were suffering at the margins. So one of the key issues we face, and we are trying to now say, how do we adjust? We'll have to integrate for some time to come welfare, if we call it, into our portfolio. That means the livelihoods portfolio cannot be. So if we work in, say, Pradhan is working in, say, 20 districts in Jharkhand, they'll have to, and they have already acknowledged they are integrating welfare into this. One other thing people are beginning to integrate is health and nutrition. So if health is to specialize the discipline, at least include nutrition into your portfolio. And Manmohan Singh talked about, 44% of the Indian children were suffering from malnutrition, but today the number cannot be less, it would be more. So this is one thing that we are learning. Second, I will even quote our Honorable Prime Minister's this thing: local is vocal. What happens? You imagine if the public services are pulled back because of the emergency it was, and the NGOs also cannot travel, what would happen? Communities depend on themselves. So which are these communities? Basically, communities' own organizations. It's like RWAs, we call it. So SHG federations and the panchayats became most important formations. People depended on them. So the THR I was talking about also was actually arranged out of the food rations we gave, as RCRC was a coalition. They were the ones who were arranging. So I just want to make 2 points, that as Mao said, go to people or teach them how to fish. I think this is also to connect to the trust deficit point. If you go and actually visit the households, the tribal households, and spend 7 nights, 7 days, trust will come back to you, how that person actually lives. Automatically, there will be unrestricted funding. There will not be any red herring, as Louis was talking about. So just those 3 points I want to make as initial remarks.
Thank you so much. Mrinalini, I'm going to go back to you. And again, many of the people on the call are supporting NGOs or running NGOs themselves. What have been some of the areas of intervention, I guess, that the Banyan has had in terms of helping NGOs with their own mental well-being? And have you seen greater collaboration, as Govind was asking earlier, with mental health organizations and groups that are doing education or pure play healthcare or other aspects?
Sorry, can you just repeat the last part? There was a connect.
Have you seen a greater sort of collaboration and for people on this call, if they're working or volunteering with NGOs that are not mental health related, are there things that the Banyan or other groups are doing that can support on the mental well-being of their communities or their staff?
Absolutely. So, yeah, we have had actually a lot of people come forward asking us to support many corporates that, we work with for the mental health of and well-being of their employees. We have long insisted. So for us, again, I feel that there is a sort of moral posturing that sometimes happens with, NGOs, where we're expected to be there 24/7 for everybody all the time. And and while I completely agree that that's our job, and we know what we got into, but I think a well-being of the people whom we work with, especially at a time like this, and we're talking about unrestricted funds. So what I would say is definite investment in staff well-being, especially people who work with vulnerable populations, like Dr. Arya said. So we are looking at people who work with juvenile delinquents, or people with mental health issues, and others in difficult circumstances. So the well-being of our staff and all of us is critical, and we definitely need our corporate partners and anybody else, our volunteers, to understand that we get tired too. So we need to be taken care of, and we're coming together as a community right now to do that. But if others also understand that this break, and coming together and supporting us through this time is very, very important. And I just like to make an additional point here as a response to what Dr. Arya said. So we also work with our clients. One of our key focus areas is employment and livelihoods for persons with mental health issues, because as you may know, only 25% of people with severe mental health issues are incorporated into the workforce. This is a global statistic, and in India it's far lower, especially in the unorganized sector. We have a lot of people who are working, but they don't get any kind of supported employment. We're talking about insurance in mental health care, but you want to look at insurance, even workforce participation for people with mental health issues in the unorganized sector. So these are the investments. So when we want to take a break, and that I'm somebody with a mental health issue, I'm somebody with any other disability, what is the support that I'm going to get in addition to just a mere quota? I need, when I'm not feeling up to it, I need to be told that resignation is not my only option, right? And that will, and being there and organizing that additional source of support for them makes a huge difference in the trust building that we're talking about across cadres, and to say that it's okay, we can come back, we can discuss it and draw boundaries for each other. So United States and the United Kingdom has this concept called supported employment, which for people with mental health issues has been proven to be very, very effective. So where are these protective mechanisms for workplace mental health, both for for everybody, especially for people with disabilities? So I feel these are some of the conversations and investments that we need to be having.
Oh, thank you. And please, if anyone has questions, please put it in the chat box. Ved, I'm going to come back to you. If you want to speak a little bit about the Now Fund, I think that would be interesting for the people here in terms of, again, innovative ways to support smaller NGOs that are suffering.
Why has to be always a pecking order, Is it because we have this Brahmin, Kshatriya, Baniya, Shudra, this hierarchy? Everywhere it pops up, these what you call sort of structural issues. And I want to talk about this because I get beaten black and blue both sides. If I speak in favor of small, the big guys are hitting me. And if I talk in favor of the big guys, then the small guys are hitting me. I am talking about the context of the coalition we have built, which you asked Mrinalini about. And Mrinalini, by the way, I just visited Keystone Foundation, so I'll just talk to you later or offline. That the coalitions that we have brought together has this key issue that if we want to be seen to be making a delta, that difference, it can't be to the likes of Pradhan. Many of you might be knowing, or Aga Khan Rural Support Program, or BIF, or larger organizations, right? They can take care of themselves. It's like the UN Security Council, the 5 people can take care of themselves. But it is a difference we can make in the lives of smaller organizations. that are suffering because FCRA sub-grant is closed, because the PM CARES fund is taking most of the CSR funds, because now even the small retail philanthropist living on the MG Road in Bangalore is not trusting a small NGO, and therefore this trust deficit is keep coming back. How can I trust that guy? You know, he is not from Doon school. You know what I mean? So how can I trust the piece of paper he's writing and sending it to me in a desperate fashion? So what has happened over a period of time, or this has not happened only because of COVID. I want to point this out. This has been going on. People who are more articulate like me, I can talk that language because मेरी class का है. You will some connection I can find with IIT IIM degree you can find always, or he will inherently trust because actually fluke से तो मैं गया था, but I know people will say, you know, this guy is from that background. So I think this hierarchy, so what has happened is that we have tried to create a fund called Now Fund, where smaller NGOs have not been able to pay salaries for last 3 months to 6 months for their staff. Because earlier, if Oxfam was able to give money, sub-grants to small NGOs working in Bihar, or somebody else was able to give, Pradhan was able to give some money like Gates was giving us last year, then what would happen to them? They have to shut shop. And they have, what happens as a result? Small communities in far and wide areas, in the Northeast particularly, areas like Bihar, areas like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, those are the communities that ultimately suffer. So we want to actually create a fund. Also, let me also point out, Deval's organization, Dasra, asked me, please point out which are the small organizations needing funds. And let me also point out that there is hope that Crypto Relief Fund, when we put up 20 proposals to them, they said no problem. Whichever organization you put up without any trust deficit, we will be able to support you. So I want to just say that small organizations may not be able to use the jargons like sustainability or gender equality or even mental health. They will not describe mental health in the way Vikram Patel writes in the Indian Express or the Hindu. So I think we need to, that is why I want to share with you, my thought is this, that can we do unrestricted funding? That is also a jargon. How do you trust somebody? How do you trust your own son who's wavered? My question to you is that, were you risking your money all your life on that guy who does not listen to you? My son does not listen to me. My daughter does not listen to me. Either I still am funding our education. Why? Why can't we go and just visit a couple of villages these people are working? Ask the community. You will know yourself. I ask you, when you are interviewing people, you should reference checks. If Deval says, yes, good guy, you go and take it. Okay, the reference check. But I think we need to do a little more in terms of just spending time with people in the villages or in the slums. And I think the trust will come back. So that's why, and I want to say that if we cannot support small organizations, the danger is that knowing that every organization starts small, it means the younger generation of Indians will not come to this sector. They will not join because they will always start small. My proposal to Tata Trust was rejected, but I could take it. But I think this is very, very important question, Deval, you have asked. And I want to appeal to my friends to support small organizations and young entrepreneurs, if I may be allowed, Buddha fellows who just leave the campuses and want to do something in the villages. So I think that is my long answer to the question you have asked.
And so Ved, I think you also have, well, with Catalyst 2030 now, a list of NGOs, and the maximum requirements we're looking at supporting that you were telling me was 3 lakhs, right? So 3 lakhs, it will help an organization possibly for a 3 to 6 month period to continue payroll, to keep their lights on, to provide some level of support to the community, especially those that are in the hinterlands. And so after this, we can send more details across for anyone who wants to know more about the Now Fund. But this is something that the last speaker, in fact, that you all had, Anshu Gupta, Ved, and others are sort of putting together with Catalyst 2030. So there's a real need. And I think it's just important for the listeners to realize, given the whole FCRA laws, the smaller NGOs are the ones who've suffered the most. Traditionally, they were getting funding from larger NGOs, but that has all sort of been put to an end September 2020. And so now a lot of the larger funding agencies don't have the ability to make small grants because their transaction costs are just way too high. So in the past, a donor sitting outside of India would give money to an NGO, let's say like SRIJAN, and then SRIJAN would give it to, again, FCRA registered organizations, but multiple NGOs would then get that level of support. NGOs who didn't speak English, NGOs who didn't have the ability to maintain sort of US contacts and fundraising contacts. And those are the smaller NGOs now that have zero funds with them.
So they will give me just 1 minute.
Please, Ved, please.
So, you know, half of this country does not receive enough rains. This time also, we know some part of Rajasthan has not received rains. There's an area which is known for Phulan Devi. It's called the Bundelkhand. There are small organizations who want to revive the water bodies. So earlier SRIJAN got the money from Reshma, from Hindustan Unilever Foundation. We were able to sub-grant. Now this year we cannot do that. So I'm just illustrating. I mean, those who are nearby Bangalore or Hyderabad, they will know Anandpur, one of the driest districts. So I think small organizations need to be supported. Thank you.
Mrinalini, I know there have been a few questions on the side that you've been answering on. I don't know if you want to give a little bit more lengthy answer from some of the questions.
Yeah, just to sort of tie in multiple things that are being discussed right now, I'd like to talk about education in the development sector, because we are saying small organizations, everything starts small, but, right now they're sort of, we're walking amongst giants, right? So there are big, so sometimes people who start these organizations itself, there may be a sense of intimidation or whatever it is, or reluctance to approach philanthropy. So I feel that even when you do a master's, which itself is a very, very small percentage of which itself is not accessible to a large part of the country. So when, first of all, I feel that should change. But apart from that, when we are looking at master's courses and syllabus in master's, partnerships building, stakeholder management, sustainability, these are conversations and skills that need to be brought in. Not not everybody can go and study abroad. Some of us are privileged to have done so, but not many people can do that. So why is there this information asymmetry that's happening? And now more than ever, we can see the disparity in our country and the knowledge gap. It has to be non-negotiable that anybody who is entering the development sector should be supported by the education system, and there needs to be this again collaboration on making sure that there is a sufficient capacity that is built, so that there is as far as possible we try to diminish the small NGO versus big NGO gap. And that is as important as important as investments for the programs that they're running. We need to build leadership in the sector. We need to have more able social workers, psychologists, and other development sector professionals, especially primary care professionals who really are from the grassroots. They're from similar circumstances themselves, and are not given with first in salaries are not great. But in addition to that, they're not provided with that level of information that the work that they're doing is brilliant. So that will empower them. And secondly, any other capabilities that they'd like to build, it needs to go all across. And that is, the only way we can keep bridging this small NGO versus big NGO gap. Funding is one part, but education and capacity building through NGOs, through philanthropies, and, they have a lot to say as well. Taking on a sort of participatory approach to understand what the challenges in the development sector are together and how can we work around them. So I feel that education becomes as important a piece as financial investment for the smaller NGOs, especially at times like these.
No, thank you. And I think you all, even in the mental health space, you've been doing, again, tremendous work, given, like you were just saying, there's been a real gap in terms of what education is required. Can you just give some high-level statistics in terms of how many trained psychiatrists or psychologists we have in the country and what the needs are?
Yeah, so this is a very, very famous number. So we have only 0.3% psychologists for 100,000 population, not percentage, 0.3 psychologists for 100,000 people. We have a total of 8,000 psychiatrists in the country, 4,000 social workers, 3,000 clinical psychologists, and about 2,500 to 3,500 mental health nurses. They are few and far away, and most of them are also clustered around urban areas, or are sort of restricted to larger asylum spaces. So we don't have any capacity building or any professional clinical care support for people with mental health issues. Forget mental health professionals for other sectors like the education sector, or the larger disability sector, or people who work with SC/ST communities, or with the people who from Safai Karamchari communities. Forget all that. We are nowhere close to even meeting the need for our own people with mental health issues. So yeah, I mean, that's, I think, where we stand in terms of statistics.
No, thank you. Thank you. Ved, there's a question here about, there are a few questions in the chat box. I don't know if you're able to see them or not. Ramesh is asking, how do we define small versus big NGOs? Then there's a question around what is the typical question that NGOs are being asked around admin expenses? How much money will actually go to the beneficiary? And then something around the competency and program management for medium, small NGOs for achieving outcomes effectively. So any of those, if you'd like to answer, Ved, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's one of those questions which is often asked. So let me give some numbers. During COVID, we decided we will not ask for more than 5%. If somebody was giving, say, $100,000, like Vadhwani Foundation is giving 50,000, some other is giving. So we said we'll make do with just 5%. And I'm talking about this time is a COVID time. It's a time which is time of distress. So we basically are looking at only 5%. You can call it admin, you can call it basically pass-through cost, whatever you call it. But more or less, my experience is it is actually 15 to 20%, which is to be looked at as admin. What is admin? But let me ask you one question, all of this. Is Modi's salary admin expense? Is Rishad Premji's salary admin expense? What do you call admin expense? And why are we so I think Govind Iyer or here, who are Ramesh Daswani, if you go to the village, sit in the community, do you need drinking? His one day salary in the travel expense, even if he stayed in Lake Palace Hotel in Udaipur, is it admin expense? If you're working with community, trying to find out the solutions to the problems that they face, is an expense. So I think that you and FCR has done it one more time, so it's less than 20%. Then what happens? There's data that Bridgespan collected. So many organizations, I'm forgetting the number, 33% or 45%, Deval, you might help me recall, who did not even have these admin expenses to begin with. That means they were in their actual bank account, there was not money, even this 20% was not there. And then let me ask you, in this casteist country, the organizations that were headed by Dalits, Adivasis, and may I include Muslims and women, they were suffering even more. This is India for us. So I think we have to not think so much about that. So what solution we had was, this is development support cost. As you go to the villages, like I lived in the villages for 6 months, and I tried to find out what is going on, and then we did something. We need to look at the investment of time is a development investment. It is not admin. Yeah, somebody sitting in an account section, you may call it admin. If he's printing something on the computer, on the printer, that's admin expense. Or rental is admin expense. But it does, Bankar Roy goes and stays in a village in Ajmer district. Yeah, what is this admin expense we are talking about? I'm really, we need to think about what is the admin expense. It's coming from my side of the world, which is corporate sector where I came from. What is admin expense? We need to unpack this. This is one. Second, what is small and big? I happened to be there in the technical group for Social Stock Exchange. So we were wrestling with this. I was trying to fight for small organizations to be also listed in Social Stock Exchange whenever that becomes reality. So I was trying to say that 25 lakh rupees turnover in a year is small. And Mr. Amarjit Singh of ED, he says, no, 1 crore. Then I brought Harsh Bhanwala on my side and we settled for 50 lakh rupees. Now I'm asking you, is 50 lakh rupees, that means in the context of the Now Fund, is 50 lakh rupees a year? You say it's a rich NGO. But you'll say, no, it's very small. Even he's finding difficult to get into the Social Stock Exchange. So that is I'm answering questions with questions rather than giving you any answers. The third one, totally agree with Vijay Paul that just to basically it aligns with what Mrinalini was saying. Many of us in this sector have not come from any of the institutions. In fact, last 20 years, people from IRMA have also stopped coming to this area, to this sector. They've gone on to join ICICI Bank. So I think we need to build a capacity building fund for small NGOs where, as Mrinalini says, presentation, communication, the language, project management, PowerPoint, even Zoom, how to do this online. And I'm telling you, my friend in the Omidyar told me, you don't use any technology. So we have become the Adam Zamane ka people. Can we introduce technology to small NGOs so they can skip whatever, take a big leap and actually begin to talk to people? Can we have online courses for them to use technology so that this issue of trust, they can actually post every year's balance sheet, every year's annual report, how much money they are actually using on the human resources, how much money they are putting in the community for water resources. So I think we have to help them with technology so that they feel at ease with this thing. And let me share with you, Gates Foundation is giving us some money this year. They have agreed to totally repurpose that grant for building capacity of small NGOs. Same thing Ford Foundation is doing with us. So I think organizations are recognizing, and Axis Bank Foundation, Dhruvi told me, she's looking for ways to fund small NGOs. So I think we should have a dialogue. I would request SVP and request Deval to have a dialogue between the donors who are normally known to give money to larger NGOs. They are also realizing that small NGOs have to be supported. So can we build a capacity building fund? And I would like to offer a non-financial partnership with SVP on how to build capacity of the small NGOs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ved. Mrinalini, it'd be good just to understand it, because I know even the institute that you work with and for is not what typically Banyan started out with. And clearly you needed some sort of donor to say, we will fund an institution. And so if you can talk a little bit about that journey, because I think we have few institutions in our country. And I think the Banyan is a perfect example of a group that was focusing on mental health for many, many years, but then realized that there was something that needed to be done for the sector in addition to sort of the homes that you all run. If you can talk a little bit about that journey. And the reason I bring it up is because Govind, one of your questions was, how can the partners on this call then help their NGOs through similar journeys of pivot, of change, of even scale? But Mrinalini, it'd be good to hear your story.
Yeah, I think there was a complete advantage in the fact that two young women who just finished college decided to start this off because of an emotional reaction. You know, we didn't really have a blueprint when we started 30 years ago. I'm speaking on behalf of our founders here. And initially it was just for them to get together, do something good, like all of us start out when we're young, you know, doe-eyed and, you know, very, very happy. But the sector that I think they chose is one of the most complex and under-resourced sectors in the world. We're not, there isn't a department of homelessness and mental illness. So everything had to be learned on the go. And there was I mean, I can't describe their journey for them, but I can very effectively say that we were undermined at every stage. We were sort of asked to go by the norms that existed in mental health, which we didn't want to, because the founders lived with our clients for 8 years in a 3-bedroom apartment. So everything was based on learning. So when they had the privilege to do that, what they felt is a lot of people started reaching out to them and said, hey, can you teach us to do what you did and what you pulled off? And it's not in terms of one model, and what they never said it's perfect. They said everything has to go through phases, and mental health can't be one cluster. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So we were at a juncture in 2007 when we started the Banyan Academy, with so many incredible NGO and funding partners came forward and said, we need to do this because we need to sort of learn to learn. And that and that is very, very important in the development sector, to constantly keep evolving and be dynamic, and because the socio-political landscape of the country is changing rapidly. So we need to we need to equip ourselves for it. We need to lead the whole thing. So in 2007 we started doing capacity building for partner NGOs in Assam, in Karnataka, in Kerala, and of course in Tamil Nadu through the Panchayat Academy. Then we started, increasing the number of courses that we offered, and started getting into often under-discussed topics like transcultural psychiatry, faith healing in mental health, which was sort of a taboo, because everybody wants to take the strict erudite route to mental health care, which we all know doesn't work all the time. So we started these conversations and then moved on to running master's courses, with the Tata Institute of Social Sciences for about 8 years. Now we want to go back, to working with our NGO partners and with governments, because we feel that both need to link together. So we need to have courses that, 2-year or 3-year master's courses or fellowships that where, people who are targetedly going to work in NGOs are trained. And second is NGOs that have already started, how can we offer fellowships for them? And for all this, we require investments. And for all this, we require a lot of tech support. So I myself, personally speaking, I feel like a bit of a dinosaur, because it takes a long time to understand technology. And I can only imagine, my friends in rural areas and tribal areas without that sort of connectivity. So if we want, investments to grow, and infrastructure is a very, very often frowned upon investment topic, because they say, oh, are you trying to make your building pretty? No, I'm trying to make my building accessible. I'm trying to make my social spaces fun and enjoyable, and show, I want to draw a cartoon or two, but that's what makes me happy. Right. So these are so-called soft skills, but they make such a huge impact. And this needs to be understood in the context of education, in the context of capacity building, and in the context of investment. So, I mean, I took a slightly long-wounded route there, but I just felt that very nuanced conversations, and the smaller things really, really matter. And last point would be smaller education spaces. Everything, whether we don't believe in large institutional care at all, but that's a different story. But even with regard to education, we feel that, smaller learning groups that can sort of come together has a lot quicker impact and quicker turnaround. And you spend more time not with didactic education, but more, getting together and reviewing and doing it constantly. So again, in the education paradigm, having these mentor and support groups will be very, very important, where we come together, not maybe 60 of us, but just 5 of us. And then, in a larger group like a pyramid, to understand what our learnings have been. So I think this is what, we need to triangulate in the education and development sector.
I think, Deval, we're coming to the, can you hear me?
Yes.
No, I just think it's been a fascinating conversation hearing Ved and Mrinalini with their passion and with their ideation, really giving so much food for thought to the 50 plus people on this call. So with your permission, Deval, I'll just bring this to
Please go ahead.
a closure. So thank you very much for your insights. There were many, many takeaways. And I think the most important thing over here is for us to be humane, humble, recognize small is big, and not that big is the only thing to go after. And I think the working collectively and collaboratively, and definitely on behalf of SVP, I can say we'll try our very best, whether it's unrestricted funding or trying to give access to the smaller NGOs is something that we will think about. But I wanted to thank you, Ved and Mrinalini, and most importantly, Deval, for steering this conversation and providing so much pearls of wisdom to all of us at this call. So thank you very much. And thank you all who joined for being on the call. We lost 8 people, so that's a pretty good outcome after 1 hour, 15 minutes. So I'm sure we'll learn a lot from this, and thank you again on behalf of SVP.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Govind. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Deval.
Govind. Thank you, Deval.
Thank you.
Thank you all
I've
for
put
bearing
my
with me.
email address on the.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take very good care.
Take care.
Thank you.